I mentioned at the start of the show we have a guest joining us in studio, which is always fun, of course. And I think many of you may have read this book or seen the movie or both. I'm going to show you the book first. The book is called Same Kind of Different as Me. It was written by Ron Hall and Denver Moore. And I'm going to hold it up and just show you. This has been out of 2017. We'll find out, ask him in a moment. But it's been out a while. Great book, true story, and then made into a film, Same Kind of Different as Me. Just you see it here, right here. And the beauty of this book was that it was a true story, and it was a gentleman named Ron Hall, who's here with us today, who wrote this book. And essentially, in very short, it was his life experience, life episode of coming into contact and coming to be close friends with a gentleman who had been homeless and had a pretty rough life up until the time they became friends. Well, I do want to talk about the book and the movie today. I also want to talk about, and mainly want to talk about, the work he's been doing since that time to advocate for homeless policies on behalf of the homeless people in this country that treat them with dignity and yet the expectation of progress in their lives. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, hello, Ron Hall.
Well, thank you, Debbie. I tell you, after hearing the first five, I want to tell you that you are the same kind of different as me. I love that. I am all about speaking out against the woke and cancel culture.
Oh, we're going to be best friends now.
Yes.
This is great. Okay.
Yes, I spend a lot of my time discussing that because, you know, it's our nation will never be the same again unless we as conservatives speak out, because they are trying to overpower us and doing a really good job with it.
Oh, they are. And, you know, the oddest thing, we can go off on this for a moment. The oddest thing about this wokeness thing is in the younger generation, for people who grew up when schools were teaching more and more of a kind of an anti-American view, a pro-socialist view, they have come to this thinking, this wokeness culture, thinking it's the enlightened way to think. Like they're the advanced thinkers, and we who are concerned about it don't understand what real truth is.
Well, you know, today I read where they canceled the parade permit for our veterans parade in New York, and they are the people that gave us our freedom.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same parade, at the same time, they gave the permission to the BLM to have their parade and to the Cannabis Society.
Gosh. Okay. Well, I missed those stories. I feel like I should be taking notes. Wow. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a combination of thinking. I think there are some right answers in many questions. There's, as I often say on my show, there's truth and not truth sometimes. But even if you have different views, what cancel culture says is you can't even talk about it. If you say what we don't believe, you are to be ridiculed, labeled, mocked, and silenced. And they feel justified because they're shutting down something horrible and awful. Yes. And it's very dangerous because it's hard to figure how you get out of it. You can't just keep arguing the issues. You have to argue the larger picture of we're allowed to have this American political conversation. We're allowed to talk.
Well, and even in our homeless work, the new regime is doing things in the Fairness and Equity Act that they're passing that really cancels a lot of the work that we do with the homeless. And,
wow, I did not know that. So the Equity Act has to do with extending the protections that formerly were there in federal law for race, sex. I mean, the laws we have to protect against discrimination. Yes. And they're adding into it equity.
Equity, yes.
Yes.
And religious. I mean, if you want any type of assistance from the government, you cannot have any type of religious program. And whether people understand this or not, most homeless people, they don't become homeless because they run out of money. They become homeless because they run out of friends and family, that they have done something usually so bad in their family and friends, the circle, that they're just put out. And so they are a little bit rebellious, obviously. And so when they go into in order to really help them, you have to get them into a shelter, a program, because many of them are addicts. And so you have to trade one addiction for another. If they're a drug addict or if they're an alcohol addict. But if you're going to really help them, you have to get them excited about something else. And we have found that religion is the most thing that they can get excited about, because they can find help and they can find hope
They find meaning and purpose
yes.
and identity in a sense. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay.
We're being canceled out of a lot of those things, or they're trying to.
So that is so interesting. I never thought about that. I mean, cancel out these great programs, help people. Well, before we get into everything you're doing now, and I have a stack of things that you're doing now, but very briefly for our listeners, I would be surprised to have very many listeners who didn't read your book. But very quickly, I'd love to have you capsulize that story. Your wife became involved helping the homeless.
Yes, okay, and a spoiler alert, I'll say my late wife, because I have remarried now. But my late wife in 1998, we go back to this story, what you said you didn't realize when this book came out. It first was published by HarperCollins in 2006.
Okay.
So it's been out 15 years
wow,
now.
Okay.
And it was a New York Times bestseller, stayed on the list for 3.5 years. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller. And the story is all true, but it's really in 1998, my late wife, Debbie, we had just left Dallas and moved back to Fort Worth so we could be closer to our ranch. And in the first night or so that she was back in Fort Worth, where a town that we had been to school together at TCU, that night she had a dream, a literal dream, and she saw a man's face. And she said, the next morning, she said, Ron, I had a dream, an extraordinary dream last night about a poor man who was wise. And she said it was like a verse in Ecclesiastes. That he was a poor man who was wise, and by his wisdom, our city and our lives would be changed, yet no one knew his name.
Could I jump in and say, I've forgotten, I have the trailer. Actually, I'll ask our listeners, I sent Matt, the very wonderful producer, a trailer of this film, even though it's been out since, the film's been out since
2017.
Okay, so Matt, if you can quick play that trailer and then we can keep talking, please.
I had another dream last night.
Was it a good one, or was it about me?
It was about a poor wise man who changes the city, and I saw his face.
Man, am I glad you guys showed up.
Debbie, I got a sales call at 6:30. I got to drop off contracts north of town.
No, you don't.
Any infectious diseases floating around this place I should know about?
Martin told me about your friend. If you don't tell Debbie, I will.
We've been married 19 years. We don't share the same life. We don't share anything.
You can leave. You choose. We have to talk to him. That's a man from my dream. What's your name?
You don't need to know my name.
Well, I'd like to know your name.
Tell your woman to stop bothering me.
You'd be doing me a big favor to just be nicer.
You want to be my friend?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm gonna have to think about that.
Where you from?
After I died, the man put me up in a little shack. He didn't tell me that I could earn some money, maybe even some respect.
You're befriending some homeless man.
You lost your mind. They're looking for handouts instead of using their hands for work.
Then figure out why he'd want to know me. Done some bad things.
You're not a bad man, and I'm glad we're friends. Very sexy what you did today.
Hanging out with a homeless guy.
How was it?
Actually, it was kind of amazing.
Some things you need to know about Miss Debbie. She's the only person to love you enough not to give up.
I love you, Ronnie Ray.
Whether we's rich or poor, we's all homeless, just working our way back home.
Okay, honestly, it was really hard to even cut off any portion of that, but that was told a lot of the story already. So you took this experience and became involved yourself in helping the homeless.
Yes. This gentleman who was known as Suicide on the Streets. He had been homeless for more than 25 years, and when we met him, he was living in a dumpster, or by the dumpster in the inner city. He'd never been to school a day in his life. Of course, he didn't know how to read and write, and he was an ex-con. He had served 10 years in prison in Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana. So he had everything going against him to keep him from being success or keep him from having any hope. But I can tell you, as we work with homeless missions across America, there are thousands of Denvers out there. His name was Denver Moore, and there are thousands of them. But just like he said, Miss Debbie just kept blessing him. And he said, he told the people at her funeral, he was full of hell. And he
Yeah.
said, but Miss Debbie, she kept blessing him and never gave up on him till she finally just blessed the hell right out of him.
That's a great line. That's a great line. So you took this experience. Obviously, you just told me before we started that this young man, this man Denver, had actually come to stay with you after your wife passed on. He'd lived with you for a while.
Yes, well, her final wish to me was, please don't give up on Denver. God is going to bless your friendship in a way you can never imagine.
Wow.
And she said, and by the way, don't name anything after me. But with that, a few hours later, she went to heaven. And then Denver, after a few months, he moved in with me. And we lived together for the next 12 years as roommates.
Okay, so blessing you. Actually, I saw one quote you had something about, he says, I blessed him, but he blessed me. So, I mean, I want to get beyond this story, which is magnificent, but you became an activist on behalf of homeless. And it's not just protecting them, but it's finding policy paths forward for communities. So I want to just, so what is the answer? We right now, I'll tell you, right here in Dallas, you obviously know you're here, we do have a growing population of homeless people who are becoming a little bit more aggressive and then sometimes disruptive, and there's a lot of clamor to the government to do something. So what is it? And you studied the problem and go around the country trying to help. What's the answer? How do we help?
Well, with mental illness, there's not a lot you can do unless you have a place that you can work with these people and help them through, to get them medicated, to help them with their illness. And a lot of the people on the streets need medication. They need medical care.
Yeah.
And the hospitals are overrun with people because they can just show up. The homeless can just show up free at an emergency room, and they can tie up the whole emergency room for all of the emergencies that are going on. But I have noticed across the country, as I've worked with homeless shelters all across America, the most successful cities dealing with the, I don't say the problem of homelessness, I say the opportunity, because my late friend Denver told me, he said, y'all see us as a problem, but God sees us as an opportunity for the faithful to show his love.
Okay.
And so I see this as an opportunity. And the cities that are doing the best job at it are doing, first of all, they find them jobs. Sometimes the city will employ the homeless to pick up trash on the streets. They'll give them a nice vest. They'll give them a minimum wage, and then they can stay in a shelter or outside if they choose. Some people really choose to stay outside. They want to do that, and you can't force them inside. But then some people are building tiny homes, but the people that I'm talking about that are sometimes dangerous and medicated, that need to be picked up and taken to a facility, if you take them to some of these homeless shelters have clinics in there where they can detox them overnight, and they can talk to them about things that are important and try to, have a person there that cares and will try to talk some sense in them to becoming a part of a program where they can radically change their lives, which is offered at almost every homeless shelter. And most of these receive no government funds, because if they receive government funds, they take God out of the equation.
I do. So I like that you're segregating among groups of homelessness. I mean, the people who are addicted, you can't really help them until you get them cleaned up of the addiction. So that's maybe a hospitalization or a clinic of some kind to live at. But those who just need to kind of sober up, but they maybe don't have an addiction, they need the kind of counseling a homeless center can offer. And maybe that's overnight or a couple of days. And
yes, and the most of the successful programs in cities have a detox center attached to a homeless shelter, where if the police pick them up, they don't take them to jail. They don't need to be in jail for that night. They need to be at a detox center that someone will watch them and then love them, bless the hell out of them.
Bless the hell out of them. I'm going to use that expression now.
Yes. And then what really is exciting are people in Dallas like Darren Babcock at Bonton Farms. And have you been to Bonton Farms?
No, I've heard about it, but I've not been there.
Bonton is a model program for ending homelessness. And if you can end, you can really never end it, but if you can really be successful in managing the homeless population and blessing them back into a life that's meaningful, Bonton Farms in America, right here in Dallas, Texas, is doing the best job of anywhere in America, other than Community First Village, which is a similar program in Austin, Texas. But there are many cities now doing tiny homes. And these tiny home villages, which I think the Dallas City Council maybe just nixed the one that Bonton wanted to expand. So I know you want to ask me a question, so I'm going to shut up.
You can see the look on my face. I was with someone recently, and I had that look, and he goes, go ahead. And I said, I didn't say anything. He goes, you should never play poker because you can read your face. But what I want on Bonton Farms, because I hear about it so great. So is this tiny homes? Is Bonton has tiny homes?
Well, it's not yet. There are homes, but it's actually it's rehabilitating an entire community. That was landlocked in Dallas. It was one of the most dangerous places to Dallas to be, and no person that didn't have to be there would ever walk in Bonton. But now they have a beautiful farm. They grow their own vegetables. The community is all a part of it. The houses are clean. They're painted. The people have been transformed. They have a church there. They have a restaurant. They have a store, all being operated by the people that live there. And they were all basically a lot of them were homeless, but they were all just the lowest of the poverty in Dallas. It was the most impoverished area. But the other cities that are doing the tiny home villages are remarkable places also, especially in Austin.
So who funds Bonton Farms?
It's all privately funded.
So this would be, I want to get into this a little bit because I think that part of what happens as government programs grow, I think we talk about this on the phone, but if government programs grow, then people think, well, the government takes care of the homeless, but actually churches, foundations, all sorts of private family charities would help if they knew the need was there and they didn't feel like they were going to be, that they felt their help was actually needed. And so I think that's part of what's happened with homeless policy is as government programs grow, foundations and churches step back. And your point earlier about what the role of churches to give people a sense, not just we'll feed you and clothe you, but a sense of purpose, identity.
Yeah. It's a family. It becomes a family. And my friend Denver used to tell me about, he didn't take government money. But, I guess he was probably entitled to some kind of check if he had wanted to go sign up for it. But he would tell me that, Mr. Ron, the only way you can change a homeless person is by love. And he said, and the government don't love nobody.
Yeah. Actually, back to our earlier conversation, which I will not distract us again, but on this wokeness thing, there have been people writing about wokeness as almost like a religion, a set of beliefs you must have. And among many things, there's no love in wokeness. There's no fondness, no connection. It's all empty.
Hate.
It's all hate, and it's dark and empty and divisive. Okay, but back to this. So if you were in charge of a city and they said, look, we have a big homeless problem, run down the litany, what would you do?
Well, I would take some vacant land that the city has that they're not using or using for purposes that, maybe are no longer needed. I mean, they have a beautiful Samuel Farm out here that it could be a wonderful place for tiny homes. I was just in Springfield, Missouri, where they're building these beautiful tiny homes for the homeless. They grow their own foods. They even have their own cemetery there where they can die there. But the people that are living there, they're not just living there free. You have to do something every day to earn your home that's there, and you pay rent on what your ability is to pay. But they have little cottage industries where you can go in and make something, and a store where they can sell it. They have a restaurant where you can come and eat, and you can work in the restaurant. They have the garden that you can grow the vegetables and the food. You can be on the trash detail, and they have their own kind of government there, because in the same way they do in Austin at Community First Village. Both is started by one man, Alan Graham, and a guy in Dallas, Darren Babcock, started Bonton Farms. One person in these cities is making a huge difference, like Dr. Brown and his wife in Springfield, Missouri. They just had this vision, and one person, two people in Springfield are doing it. The coach of the Clemson Tigers, Dabo Sweeney, did the same thing. He had a vision with some friends to start a tiny home village there, and we went there to see it and to help them raise and to expand it. But you give people a permanent home that they can afford, and you give them dignity. You also they have a say-so in what goes on in their little village. It's a marvelous thing. For them, it's utopia. And they are among people that understand them and love them, and then the volunteers come there and serve them.
You know, I was thinking about the people who go there. If you've been homeless, you've been on the streets for a while, and this is a sense of hope. But what you're also learning there, these are kind of life skills you need to live outside of this in what you may call mainstream American life. You know, personal responsibility, get a job, be able to pay for your bills, keep a roof over your head. So do people who go into these kind of little villages, do they tend to stay there permanently, or do some, they do stay permanently?
Oh, yes, they have schools inside where you can get educated. They have computer classrooms. You know, first of all, one of the main problems out on the streets is that the homeless, many of them don't have IDs, identification, to get into programs, and and that's something that the city can do immediately. Is they can set up a place for the homeless to come in to establish and get their identifications. They lose these ID cards, and they're not part of a system, a lot of them, and they can't become a part of the system until you can identify who you are and where you came from. My friend Denver had never had an identification card. He only thought he knew where he was born, and he wasn't sure.
Oh my gracious.
So, but we found his birth records in a small town in Louisiana, and we're able to get him identification cards and all these kind of things that he needed, Social Security.
So these, I pulled a bunch of quick stories. I'm sure there are more. I had Bonton Farms in South Dallas. I had Eden Villages. Yep, Eden Villages. And there, you were speaking there, I guess, in the Ozarks in January. Yeah. And then Jacksonville, same kind. You were there too, speaking about. So,
well, I've done over 1,000 events on behalf of the homeless and helped raise more than $110 million.
More than $110 million.
Yes.
These are private citizens, and also I would think churches would want to play a role.
Yes,
I mean, are churches involved in some of these?
A lot of them are, yes, but you know, I wouldn't recommend anybody do what I did. I brought a schizophrenic, ex-con addict in my home who did not read or write. He didn't tell time. He used to tell me, Mr. Ron, you know, you tell me I got to be on time and on place. He said, I've spent my whole life with no place to go and plenty of time to get there. Now you got to tell me about time. I don't know about time. So, you know, it takes patience. You have to be called to this kind of work.
You certainly do, and to invite, as you say, invite someone into your home who's had that life.
No, I don't want anybody doing that.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to help, and I love to spread ideas. Yeah. My show is all about spreading ideas and that have value and worth. So moving forward, you're trying to establish these. Are you establishing an organization and help spread the word of what you're doing? Because, you know, to have more and more people, cities, towns, and town councils hear about it.
Well, we have our Same Kind of Different as Me Foundation. Okay. And it's also Same Kind Foundation. You can get to it easily that way, but the same name as our book, Same Kind of Different as Me, a charitable foundation. And we try to help different and smaller shelters throughout the city who are not connected, who don't know how to do all of the things that we have learned through that. I sit on the National Board of the Homeless. It's now called Citygate. We oversee more than 400 homeless missions in 400 cities across America. So we're on top of the situation at all times. We know what's going on. And incidentally, we had the lowest, infection rate among any population in the homeless community, because we saw the problem. We quarantined them in the homeless shelters, and we protected them. And so we had a very, very high success ratio in dealing with COVID in our.
That is really great. So people, I'm thrilled that you're raising so much money. I'm sure that large donors can be very helpful, but can just a common Joe donate to your cause to help?
Well, they can, of course, but they can also donate to their local shelters, which I love people that want to support Bonton Farms, because they are growing there in Bonton. They're getting ready to build some tiny homes. They were going to build a lot more, but the city of Dallas didn't want them, and I guess, you know, you don't understand. People think that these will be bad neighbors and bring down your neighborhood. But when you develop a village like Bonton and develop like Community First, like Eden Village, they are models. I mean, I would move in there myself And I have lived in beautiful homes my whole life.
Yeah, no, you have. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm thrilled that you're doing this. And I guess one last question so cities around the country, it seems like there's just, and maybe it's just a political trend, but there's a lot of conversation about homelessness and what should we do about it. I mean, anyone could begin a program like this in any city. They just have to find donors, land, and they kind of need a how-to. How do you get this started, right?
Oh, there's how-tos there. The best how-to is really, I would say Google Community First Village, Bonton Farm, Eden Village. There's all of these places. Even Los Angeles now has built a tiny home community in a vacant park that was so dangerous nobody would go into it. And they built these just like 150 square foot houses and housing the homeless in there. The difference in what Los Angeles is doing and what other cities that are successful are doing is the amount of government that's involved. And when it's all government and not private people to go in and love on them, you know, if you just put them up in a hotel, you hear these stories, let's put them up in a hotel. That's the worst thing you can do, because it's just a free-for-all party, and they'll destroy the building, you know, within days.
When you say love on them, I love that. It's a very Southern expression, love on them.
Yeah.
I love that expression, but it's really just showing them that someone respects you, that they care what happens to you, they will listen to what your issues are, and they want to help, which is really the message most people in life want to hear. Somebody cares.
And at first sight and at first meeting, they're not lovable.
Yeah. No argument. Yeah. Ron Hall, I love what you were doing. I'll mention for our listeners again, your original book, which I did have at home, same kind of different as me. If you have not read this, I cannot urge you strongly enough to do that. And also, Ron brought in a book today, which I had not seen, which I now own, Working Our Way Home. And it's a newer book. Is that this year?
It is, huh?
Okay,
it tells the rest of the story.
Okay, tell us the rest of the story. And then the film, too, same kind of different as me. I know we watched this, our family did. It's a regular blubber fest, actually. But anyway, it was very, very good. So, Ron Hall, thank you so much for coming and joining me today.
All right.
Just great talking with you.
Been a pleasure.